All right, everybody. Did you enjoy your lunch? We surprised you with Chick-fil-A, right? You thought it was going to be the chicken sandwich. And by the way, this is a catering meal that's provided. You can't buy that in the store. So if your church is interested in that, just contact your local Chick-fil-A and they can provide that sub for you. Let me just share a couple of things because we're going to stay on schedule. We're doing live streaming, which means we've got to start at 1. We'll welcome folks back, and I probably need to do that, Dr. Orge, because I didn't welcome those who are watching online early on, so we want to do that. But I do want to share with you a couple of things. First of all is that the PowerPoint is going to be available to you. We're going to send you a follow-up email that will include the PowerPoint and also the link to the video of the live stream. So if you miss something, you can watch again or portions of it as well. So we'll send that to you. So that'll be a blessing to you. You should have received a book by now. You should have received the book. And Dr. Orge has shared with you that he's highlighting or focusing on 2 chapters there. I wanted to also let you know that right now we're in a season of prayer. It's the 50 days of kingdom prayer. Anybody participating, we're sending out Facebook posts. And so this is day 25. We're halfway through between Resurrection Sunday and Pentecost. And today specifically, we're praying for new believers that they would be encouraged, that they would stay the course as new believers, as disciples. And so I hope you'll join me in praying for that specifically today. If you've not participated, we've got 25 more days. We'd love for you to jump in and be a part of this concerted effort of prayer. We have a revitalization conference that's coming up that I wanted to share with you about. It's on May the 20th in Appomattox, but on May the 21st, we're going to be in Bluefield. Jim Drake is going to be hosting us at his church, and we're so thankful for that. Bill Hennard, Mark Clifton are going to be with us. And so you've got a choice. You're kind of in between. You can go to Appomattox on Thursday, or you can go to Jim's church on Friday. But this is going to be a valuable conference. Now, here's the deal. You might say, well, we're in need of revitalization, or you might want to say, I want to make sure that we don't need revitalization. And so both of which would be applicable to this conference. Or maybe you would say, we're a healthy church, we're growing, but could we help another church that needs revitalization? So I would encourage you to come because the principles that you're going to learn from Bill and from Mark will be applicable to the context of your church. Women's ministry, great things are happening in that ministry. Jen Wilkin is one of the authors and speakers that many of our ladies are going to her conferences. That's going to be in May as well, May the 14th and 15th in Virginia Beach. And then I wanted to share with you a couple of resources that are on our website. This year we had our YEC conference in January, and it was done virtually. And we have had churches that have actually gone to our website, utilized the speaker, Ryan Fontenot, our worship band, who was Red Letter Society. They've used the worship sets, and they've used the curriculum to provide a D-Now weekend for their students. Now that we're getting back, we're starting to gather again. This is a great way to do that. So I want to highlight that resource. Also, we're entering into the season in preparation for Vacation Bible School. Some churches are saying we're going to wait until the end of the summer, but we want to have Vacation Bible School, whether or not it's on the property or in a park or whatever. Well, we had a kids leader conference in the spring that was done virtually as well. Every one of those breakouts, over 40 breakouts, are now on our website, many of which are trainings for Vacation Bible School, every area of Vacation Bible School. So you can still have Bible school training at your church. Go to our website, download those, watch those. It will be a great training for you. Camps are coming back. And so we have partnership with Lifeway and other camps. We know that many of our churches are utilizing those. If you've not made a decision about camp, we have 2 opportunities through the SBCV. One is Fusion Camp, which is going to take place at Euclid Avenue, actually in Bristol, in that general area, but it's going to convene at the church, and that is June the 22nd through the 26th. And you know that our Fusion camps are missions active, and so there are many projects and things that students can be involved in during the day, and then they'll come together for worship in the evening. So a great time. It's not too late if you do not have a decision on camp. Family Fusion, likewise, missions, but it focuses on the family, and this is on the Eastern Shore, July the 22nd through the 25th. Now, I know I sound like a billboard, right? Southern Baptist Convention. It's still in the same city, different venue. We're going to have an SBCV reception on Monday evening. Following that evening session, we want to invite you to come to be a part of that. We desire to just fellowship again, and so we're going to make sure that we can do that safely while in Nashville. If you're coming to the convention, we want to invite you to be a part of that. And then finally, I don't want us to forget our annual homecoming this year. It is our 25th year. Hard to believe, isn't it, Ken Ninke? It's 25 years. And so Dr. Archery says it's time for us to look like we're 25. We're no longer infants. We're no longer a new convention. We're actually 25 years old. Some great, great things in store for this year as we celebrate, but also as we cast vision for the years to come. So you need to know that the speakers are Al Mohler, Ronnie Floyd, Kevin Ezell, Stephen Rummage, and Brian Carter. And our women's ministry will have Kathy Litton speaking at the dinner, and also breakouts will be taking place. So a great, great lineup. In November, we'll be at Liberty Baptist Church in Hampton. All right. Is that all the announcements? Okay. I think it's time for the offering, if the organ would play now. All right. Dr. Orridge wanted to provide an opportunity maybe for a question or two before we go live again streaming. So guys who are doing the live stream, if you'll hold on, we'll segue, we'll welcome them back, and then I'll introduce Dr. Orridge again.
Yeah, we have to fill a few minutes here, about 3 to 5. So if there's a couple of questions about this morning's presentation or anything I've said about the seminary, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Quickly, yes. Okay. Right. It's hard for me to put a timetable on it, but I think I would affirm your wisdom in saying that launching was not the fulfilling. You have to reach a place of sustainability. And for me, that may be the place where you feel like that you're able to take the first break of vacation or the first step away, or other people start assuming some leadership. And in a new church plant, it's probably going to be a series of waves of getting there, not just one big arc, because it's so clearly defined in what I did, so ill-defined in a church plant. But I know that when we started our church, we felt like we had these checkpoints. We're going to open first Christmas, first Easter, first summer, and then we exhale because we made it. And so we had that kind of a sense. And so I would look for some checkpoints along the way to give you that sense of arriving to that new normal, but recognizing that in your early 3 to 5 years, it's going to be a series of those until you get to a place of stability. Another big checkpoint for us was when we were fully self-supporting financially. We were on an arc of being a mission of other people until we got to the point where about 3.5 years out, we were fully self-supporting. We felt like that was when we also reached one of those breakover points when we had stopped being, we'd finished that major change financially, and now we were in a new era of that for us. Look for those kind of checkpoints, yeah. Okay, another question? It's a good one. Okay. Well, I got 12:59 on the board back there, so we can take one more, or we can just get started in about 90 seconds here. So, all right, we'll go with questions.
All right.
With the seminar.
Oh, it works up here. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, John. Okay. So I've gotten word that we are live streaming already. So let me just say welcome to those who are watching by way of live stream, and thank you for being here. If you were here this morning, we just want to say thank you. On behalf of the SBC of Virginia, you are participating in what is called the Leading Change Tour with Dr. Jeff Orridge, and so we're about ready to enter the second session, the afternoon session. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you for those who've chosen to join us live here at Fellowship Community. God bless you.
Thank you. All right, I thank you for being back this afternoon. We're going to go at it here for about the next 45 minutes to an hour, and then finish by 2 and get you on the way. And me too. I have been on the road all but 3 days in the last 3 weeks, and I'm going home today, and I will make it home late tonight, early in the morning for you, but it'll still be late at night when I get home, and I'm looking forward to being there for a couple of days. That'll be great. Well, we're going to shift gears now this afternoon. This morning, we talked about the processes that you as a leader go through to initiate major change. Now we want to talk this afternoon about you as a leader having a responsibility to work through the transition that major change causes. So if you look here to the screen, you'll see a quote from a very popular book called Managing Transitions, Making the Most of Change by William Bridges. This is an excellent resource to help you understand the importance of transition. And here's the first sentence from his book. It's not the changes that do you in, it's the transitions. Now, when I read that many years ago, it leaped off the page at me, and I realized I didn't fully understand what he meant, but intuitively I had a sense he was saying something important. So that led me to discover the difference between change and transition, which helped me understand Bridges' perspective. So what is the difference? Well, change is the new set of circumstances introduced into the organization. Change is the new set of circumstances introduced into the organization. For example, change is the day the church that I've described earlier decided to relocate. Change is the day the church voted to build a building instead of being portable as it had been for 10 years. Change was the day the Board of Trustees voted to establish the fact that we were moving the seminary from Golden Gate to Gateway and from one location to another. Now, change is determined when the highest authority in your organization makes the decision. So if that's your deacons or your elders or your congregation or your board, whatever organization or church you're working in, you know who has the final say. And when that group says, we are making this change, the change has been introduced into the organization. So the change is the new set of circumstances. Now watch this. What's the difference between change and transition? Well, transition is the spiritual, emotional, and psychological adjustments people go through to accommodate the change. Transition is what people go through to accommodate, to live with, to implement the change. So get this distinction in your mind because it's vital for you as you think about how to lead people not through change, but really through transition. I almost titled the book that you've been given, Leading Major Transition, but the publisher said no one would know what that meant. So we stuck with Leading Major Change. But leading major change means that as a leader, you lead change up until the moment that you've introduced the change into the organization by the ultimate and highest authority making the decision. And then after that, you're in transition, leading people through the spiritual, emotional, and psychological adjustments they must make to accommodate the change. Now, what does this look like? Well, we make a common leadership mistake, and that is putting too much emphasis on change and not enough on transition. In other words, we say, well, we voted to build a building. Done. We voted to change our evangelism strategy. Done. We voted to move the seminary. Done. We put a lot of energy into change, but not so much into transition. Now, for example, at Gateway, we spent from 2010 to 2014, or it's from 2010 to 2012 working on trying to stay in one location. We spent from 2013 through 2014 implementing the change. But on April the 1st, 2014, when I announced that the change had been approved by our Board of Trustees and we were selling our campus and we were moving to Southern California and we were rebranding as Gateway Seminary, that was the day the change, as far as my leadership, was over. But that was also the day I initiated the transition. And then from April 2014 through 2017, I had to lead the transition. Now, how intentional were we about this? Well, you remember that leadership retreat I mentioned before lunch where I took the vice presidents away and we talked about how they had to pace themselves over that length of time? Remember that one? Well, the other thing we did at that retreat was we spent 2 days writing our transition plan. We read Bridges, that book that I've mentioned. We spent 2 days processing through it. We made a list of all the things we had to do and made assignments of all those things that had to be done. And we laid out after April 1st, well, actually building up to April 1st, we were getting ready for the transition, but starting on April 1st, going through 2017, what do we know that we have to do intentionally to manage the transition well? And that transition management plan had 113 different items on it. So our transition management plan was just as detailed and complex and challenging as the change plan was. Transition requires significant leadership, not just change. So, the common leadership mistake is putting too much emphasis on change and not enough on transition. Two things I want to say about this from our perspective as Christian leaders. First of all, Christian leaders have a spiritual motivation to manage transition well because we care about people. We care about people. We're not going to say to people, this is the change, deal with it. That's not who we are. We practice pastoral care. We care about people. We don't want to be that way. I'll give you a couple examples. When I announced the seminary is moving on April 1st, what's the first question that you think popped into every employee's mind in that room that day? Do I have a job? That was what everyone wanted to know. Well, we'll talk about this a little more in just a moment, but I couldn't really answer that question fully because you can't tell a person they have a job if you haven't had a conversation with them, if they even want the job. So we couldn't announce fully what that meant in the first speech, but we'll talk more in just a moment about what you can announce. But when I announced we're moving to Southern California and changing our name and adopting a new identity, I said to the employees, we can't know today what this means for every one of you. We won't know until we have a personal conversation with you about the implications of this for you and your family. But what I can tell you is this, you have a job now, and between now and December 31st, April to December, we will meet with every one of you one-on-one, and you will have a written agreement, a written plan of your go-forward plan in relationship to your job. And then from January 1st of next year until we move, which is the following July, another 18 months, you'll have an 18-month window to implement that plan. So we will all have a plan and know what we're going to do by the end of this year, and 18 months after that, we'll all be able to put that plan into effect. After the meeting, 2 of our employees came to see me in the next few days, and one of them said, Jeff, I kind of been through this before. I said, really? He said, I don't mean moving to seminary. He said, I came to the seminary from secular employment. He's our controller. He works in our finance area. He said, once I went to a meeting and the CEO said, we're closing our company. You have to have your desk cleaned out in 2 hours. You'll pick up your last check on your way to the parking lot. He said, another time I went to a meeting and the CEO said, we're closing our company. You have 2 weeks severance and your last day is 2 weeks from Friday. He said, you just told me that you're moving the seminary and my job may be in jeopardy. He said, I don't know that yet. But he said, my job may change or be in jeopardy. But he said, you've given me almost 2 years to figure this out. He goes, Jeff, don't let anybody tell you you're not being fair about this. He goes, I've been through this. This is awesome what you're doing. Then another guy came to me, an IT guy that worked in our IT area, and he said, same thing. Hey, Jeff, I've been through this before. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah. And he told me sort of a similar story. And he said, this is plenty of lead time for whatever's going to happen. Thank you so much for how you're handling this. Well, I did it not because I was trying to give lead time or be different than the culture or operate differently than corporate America. Why did we lay out this very detailed plan of meeting with every person individually and giving them a time frame, and then giving them another time frame, and making sure that everyone got processed properly and moved to the new location or moved into retirement or moved into, everybody had a time to do it. Why? Because we care about people at Gateway Seminary. Our people matter. So we had a very intentional transition plan about this. Same thing with students. I won't go into that, but we had a very clear plan about students, where they were in their degree programs, how we could get them to complete before we relocated, how we would take them with us if they didn't, how we would scholarship them. We had a very detailed strategic plan about transition for students. We care about people. So transition matters to us. We're not cold-hearted corporate leaders that say, this is what we're doing, deal with it. That's not who we are. So we manage transition well because we care about people. And second, we manage transition well because we see it as a disciple-making process, helping people learn and grow. Now, all of you who've been through a church building program, for example, know that when you go through a building program, you typically have Bible studies, prayer meetings, you go out and talk with people about, and you have testimonies about giving and about God's provision, and you do all these things because not only are you trying to get a building built, but what else are you trying to do? You're trying to grow the people. You're trying to help people understand how to have greater faith and how to trust God and how to become stronger in their belief in Him. That's right. We're trying to do all that. So when you're going through like that kind of major change, that's a pretty obvious one. There's a very intentional plan to grow people through the process. Same thing with mission trips. You take international mission trips and you take teams overseas, and quite frankly, you know that some of what they're going to do over there is, going to be pretty limited in it, what they can get done in a week and all of that. But why do you do it? Because you know if you take people overseas, it's going to force them to grow, right? They're going to have to pray and learn and trust and experience things they've never done before, and they're going to come back just overflowing with testimony about how God changed them through the process, right? Are you in lunch coma, right? Yeah, you get this. Well, let me tell you, just because you work at Gateway Seminary doesn't mean you still don't need disciple making. I announced we were moving. A couple of days later, a faculty member asked for an appointment. He's a younger faculty member. He's a rock star. He is on the rise, and he's awesome, okay? He's one of those guys we really wanted to go with us. He comes to my office. Mr. President, I need to talk with you. I said, okay, have a seat. I've come to tell you, I cannot move with you to Southern California. I said, okay. Why not? It's too overwhelming. The thought of my wife having to change jobs and my children having to find new schools and one of my children having some particular educational needs and having to go through that is overwhelming. I said, okay. And he said, and then for myself, I'm just not sure what it would mean for me to be there and what the students will be like and what the campus will be like. And so it's very difficult for me to tell you this because I love Gateway and I respect you and I want you to know that, but we just can't do it. I said, I understand that. Thank you for talking with me. He said, there's one more thing. I want you to hear it from me first, not from someone else. I'm going to start looking for another job. And when anyone asks you for a reference or something like that, I don't want you to be surprised. I said, I appreciate the courtesy. Thank you so much. I said, before you go, I wonder if I could just ask you a question. He said, oh, certainly. I said, if you apply for and get another job, and you will because you're very competent, won't you have to move somewhere else? Oh, yes, Mr. President. Won't your wife have to find a job and your kids have to find a school and you have to take the risk of going into a new setting? Yes, we will. Mm-hmm. Well, why don't you just think about it this way? If you're going to go through all that, why don't you just come on and go with us? And he said, well, I never really thought about it that way. I said, I know this is asking a lot of you, but I believe God will work in remarkable ways, and I believe if you're going to move anyway, you might as well just go with us. He's like, yes, I'm going to go home and talk to my wife about this. I'm like, you do that. Well, he goes down. Part of our transition plan was we had what we called exploration trips where we paid for employees to go and spend 3 days in Southern California, look at the new campus, look at the new location, look at the schools, look at the housing, and then they would come back. And once a month I had an all-hands meeting where we talked about where we were in the transition and how we were doing, and I would ask for testimony. Who needs prayer? Who's got a word? And this brother would stand up almost every time. God is at work in my life. Oh, God is at work in my family. God has provided a house. God has provided a school. God has provided a job for my wife. God is this. God is that. And I just watched him growing as a Christian right in front of my eyes, right? And he's with us still today. And he has these wonderful testimonies of how God stretched his faith and enabled him to have a greater capacity to trust God than he ever imagined because of the relocation. I saw it as a disciple-making opportunity. I want to see people grow. That's what we're about. So, we manage transition well as Christian leaders for two reasons. We care about people, and we're disciple makers. And we believe transition is an opportunity to demonstrate care and to help people grow. And if we see it from that perspective, it becomes not an onerous thing. Oh, I'm going to lead these people through transition. But it becomes a joyful thing. I get to demonstrate the care that I have for these people that God has entrusted to me, and I get to help them grow by challenging to do what they've never imagined was possible and see God at work in their lives. Now, when you're doing this, you're going to discover that there are three key aspects of managing transition. I cover these three in the book. Transition involves managing grief, strategy trumps spontaneity, and reluctance does not always equal opposition. Now today I only have time to teach on the first one, and I single this one out because it's the most important one to me. It's my most significant thing I've learned about managing transition. It's the thing I got both from Bridges' books and from experience, which has really changed the way I approach this phase of leading change/transition. I want to talk about transition involves grief management. Transition involves managing grief. Now, change, which puts people into transition, always produces a sense of loss. Now, because you're the leader and you're focusing on all the gains that are coming from the change, it's easy for you to overlook the losses that people are also experiencing in the context of change. For example, on a personal basis, a couple launches their last child off to college, and that is an exciting change in the life of the young person, and that person is so excited, but the parents are now going through what? The withdrawals of the empty nest and all the loss they feel about that. So with major change, there's always a perspective that has a lot of gain, and most of the time as leaders, that's what we focus on. But I'm reminding you that major change brings with it a sense of loss. Someone's losing something. Now, people respond to loss by going through a grieving process. And I'm going to show you what that looks like organizationally in the next few minutes. But let's put the sequence together. Change puts people into transition. Transition involves loss. Loss leads to grief, as people express this in what we call a grieving process. Now, what are some examples of spiritual loss that come from change or from transition? Here's what I mean. One of these could be something like this: the loss of ministry expertise. The loss of ministry expertise or of ministry confidence. A few years ago, we were members of First Baptist Church San Francisco, and my wife was the director of preschool ministries for the church. They had a quarterly leadership meeting after church, and I went on home, and my wife came in a little while later. She walked in, she was pale. She came in and just flopped down on a chair, and she looked despondent. Now, this is not normally how my wife reacts to any kind of thing at church, believe me. So I knew something was up, and I said, "Ann, you don't look so good. Are you okay?" She said, No, I'm not." I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, we went to a quarterly leadership meeting, and Pastor Ryan came, and he said it had been 5 years since the church had made a study of its curriculum and looked at what it was teaching and why and how. And so he told us today that he's put together a task force to study the curriculum of our church and make a decision about the curriculum we're going to use going forward." Now, as a leader, I'm thinking, okay. But as a husband for now 40 years, my husband red alert buttons are going off, lights are going off. Fellas, do you ever know what this feels like? You know something's wrong, but you don't quite know what it is, but you know not to say the wrong thing? And so I'm like, the leader side of me saying, okay. But the husband side of me said, well, this seems to be a problem. And my wife said, yeah, it's a problem. And then she said, Jeff, I've spent the last 30 years training people to use Lifeway curriculum. I know the educational philosophy behind it. I know the way it's constructed, the way it's meant to be implemented. I train people on it and have for years. I've written it, I've edited it. She said, Jeff, if the church changes curriculum lines, and these were her words, there won't be any place for me. And my wife was going through a grieving process of this great loss she was feeling of her ministry expertise being dismissed and no longer being valuable to the church in this context. We recently, the church, by the way, stayed with Lifeway curriculum. We had a Holy Ghost revival when that happened at my house, let me tell you. Okay, Holy Spirit revival maybe? Okay, you get the idea. We moved to Southern California. My wife joins a church. We joined a church. We joined the church. But my wife volunteers to teach in Vacation Bible School. Now you have to understand, Vacation Bible School is Super Bowl week at our house. Last summer, before COVID, my wife taught 3 weeks of Vacation Bible School, 1 week for our church, and then found 2 other churches that would let her volunteer to be a teacher in their Bible school, and she taught 3 weeks of Bible school that summer. My wife loves Vacation Bible School. We joined a church, and we discovered this church does not use Lifeway's Vacation Bible School curriculum. And my wife came home and said, I'm completely lost. I don't know what to do. I'm going to try my best. But my expertise, it's not going to be that helpful. Do you see what I'm trying to illustrate here? When you make a major change, somebody loses. Now, that doesn't mean you don't change curriculum lines. It just means if you do, you got to recognize that a woman like my wife with a 30-year investment is going to walk out of the room depressed, saddened, feeling a sense of loss in the moment. Here's another one. Loss of vacation and discretionary spending. I'm at the same church, First Baptist. I'm sitting in the balcony. Pastor Ryan, who I had recommended to the search committee, by the way, and who I was desperately trying to follow and support in every way possible, and who did a magnificent job for our church. He's up there on the pulpit, and he says, this morning we have a major announcement to make. We've had this study group working, blah, 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 and we knew all about that. And then he said, we're going to stay in the city, heart of San Francisco, right downtown, and to do that, we need to remodel our facility. That was no news to anyone. And then he said, we're going to start by remodeling the basement level of the sanctuary building, which is a pretty big building on the corner of a city block in downtown San Francisco. And then he said, it's going to cost $1.3 million. And my very first thought that went through my mind when he said those words was, well, there goes my vacation. Do you understand where the money comes from to pay for things that you dream up to do in these major change situations? It comes from your church members. And where are they going to get it? Well, I know where I get it. I live on a budget, just like you. This much for car insurance, this much for groceries, this much for vacation. Well, the car insurance and the groceries aren't getting cut. So if I'm going to give significantly to a church building program, I'm going to have to cut something out that I was planning to do with that money. Now remember, it's a disciple-making opportunity, right? So that was my first thought. But 6 weeks later, after I'd been to several prayer meetings, heard Pastor preach 3 or 4 sermons, read through the Bible study material they sent to my house, I came on that Sunday with a generous commitment card in my hand because I was part of the team, wanted to be a part of the project, believed in what we were doing, and was willing to sacrifice to make it happen, right? Because I was discipled over those weeks to a better response. But my first response was a sense of loss. I'm going to have to give something up here. Wait a second. Here's another one. I'll skip to the last one. Loss of spiritual heritage. Okay, so remember that story I told you a little earlier about the Signal event? Ray Sisson, the piece of property, the whole thing. I get up and I announce it on Sunday. Keith tells the story. I preach the sermon. And at the end we say, we're going to vote in 3 weeks, but this is the direction we think we're going. Come to the next business meeting. And the church starts clapping, and everybody's like, yeah! And we had the final prayer, and I looked up, and Don is standing right there. He's walked up on the platform, right there. And he said, and I quote, "I can't believe you're taking my church away from me." Now, I hadn't read Bridges. I hadn't studied this subject from any perspective. I was in my late 20s and had no clue what I was doing in terms of leading major change. I was just trying day by day to make it. But God helped me that day, and I mean that sincerely. God helped me, because my normal response to someone attacking me like that in my face right after worship service, I would have turned the 16-inch guns and started blasting, you know. But instead of doing that, I said, "Don, I'm not sure what you mean, but can I come and talk to you about that?" And he said, "I don't know what there is to talk about. You're trying to take my church away from me." And I said, "Well, can I come and talk to you?" "Yeah, I guess." And he stomped out of the building. And I stood there a little bit shell-shocked and thinking, okay. So that next Tuesday night, I went over to his house. And I said, "Don, I want to talk to you about what you said on Sunday. You were really angry. And you said I was trying to take your church away from you. And I wonder if you could help me know what you mean by that." I'm practicing pastoral care, by the way. And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what. All 6 of my kids was married in that church. Every one of my grandkids got baptized in that church. You're taking my church away from me." And then it became clear. I knew his 6 kids. Not a one of them was a member of anybody's church, as far as I knew. I'd never met any of his grandkids. They weren't in our church. And I realized that this man and his wife came to church every Sunday, sat in the same place every week, and the only happy spiritual memories they have of their family were when they looked down at the front of that church and imagined what it looked like the day those kids got married, or one of those baptisms up there in that baptistry. And I was taking away his sense of spiritual legacy or spiritual heritage. Rather than attack him that night on that issue, I said, "Don, I now understand what you're saying to me. So let me tell you what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to take your church away from you. What I'm trying to do is give a daddy in our town right now that's got 3 or 4 kids a place to come and sit down in a worship service with a seat available to him, so that 30 years from now he can say the same thing, that all his kids got married in that church and all his grandkids got baptized there. That's all I'm trying to do." Now, Don never said another word in opposition to the relocation. He also never became an advocate for it. And I'm going to talk about this at the end, and just at the end today, but he became what I call a non-adopter. He was willing to go along, but he never became an advocate. But you know what you do with non-adopters? You give them a seat on the bus and you let them ride along. Take them with you. And when the church got to the new location, he was sitting right there in the new sanctuary. Still not really all that excited about it, but glad to go along. Okay? Same thing happened at the seminary. A couple of 3 months after we made the announcement, I was in the hallway one day and a faculty member stopped me and said, "Hey, you got a second?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I want to talk to you about the relocation and all of the things that are going on. And I want to just tell you a perspective on it." I said, "Man, I'm ready." He said, "First of all, I'm totally with you. I think you made the right decision. We're moving to Southern California. We're good." I'm like, "Okay." He said, "But I want to tell you that how hard this has been." He goes, he didn't use these words, but what he was about to tell me was he embraced the change, but he was struggling with the transition, okay? He said, "I'm with you. We're going. But let me tell you how hard this has been." And then these were his words. He said, "Every spiritually important thing in my life has happened on this piece of ground." He said, "I came to seminary, and over there in that chapel, God called me to international missions during the missions conference. And out there on that parking lot, I met my wife when she walked across as a new student, and I introduced myself to her. And over there in Tishner Village, that's where we lived when our first child was born. And then after some years of service elsewhere, right in there in your office, you offered me a job on the faculty." He said, "Jeff, every spiritually important thing that's happened in my life has happened on this piece of ground. This is my place of legacy. And leaving it is hard." Now are you starting to understand what I mean when I say that change puts people in transition and produces a sense of loss? Don was losing his spiritual legacy. My faculty member was losing his spiritual heritage. My wife was losing her ministry expertise. I was feeling pressured because I was losing my vacation or the new car I was saving for or whatever it was I was hoping to put that money toward. Every one of these people ultimately in some way either embraced or cooperated with the change, but the transition was hard. Now, I'm embarrassed to say this, but when I first started out in ministry, I mistook grief for rebellion. And when people told me they were struggling, I would say things to them like, you need to get on God's time. You need to get on God's agenda here. You need to do what God is saying. You need to get with the program and follow leadership. You need to submit to authority that's made the decision and let's get going. I said those kind of things early in my ministry. And now I look back with shame on that because I was mistaking grief for rebellion. They weren't telling me no, they were telling me it was hard or that it was painful or that it hurt. And what they needed was pastoral care and disciple making, not a lecture. So, change puts people in transition. Transition produces a sense of loss, and these are some examples. Now, what does this look like in organizational life? Well, first of all, you need to identify the stages of grief. Now, if you've had a pastoral ministry class in seminary, you know some people say there's 6 of these, some 7, some 9, some 13. I've seen all kinds of descriptions of this. This is the 6-fold model we used at Gateway, and it worked pretty well for us. We said that in organizations like ours, when people are going through transition and experiencing loss, they often feel shock, anger, denial, bargaining, exploration, and adjustment. Remember that faculty member who came to me and said he wasn't going to go because he couldn't move? Remember that guy? Where was he on this? He was still in shock. He was just like, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do. He was in shock. How about Don when he came up on the platform? He was expressing what? Anger, right? I love bargaining up here. I have one faculty member who's with us in Southern California today, but he's a little bit of he's a funny guy, and he's always saying funny things, and he and I we always making jokes back and forth. So this was a little bit humorous, but it was a little bit edgy too. So after I announced that we were selling the campus, you know how real estate deals work. You have about 60 days before you close the transaction. So I announced we've signed all the agreements, and we have 60 days to close. So a couple days later, John comes by my office, and he says, hey, let me see if I got this straight. We signed a sale agreement, right? Yeah. But we haven't closed yet. I said, no, we haven't closed yet. It's 60 days. He goes, so you're saying it might not happen? I said, whoa, John, I wouldn't have gone public if I didn't think it was going to happen. So I think we got about a 98% chance. He goes, 98? I said, look, man. He goes, well, if it doesn't happen, then what are some options about staying? And I said, come on now. I don't know those yet, brother, because we're going. He started laughing. He was pulling my changes a little bit. But he was also doing what? A little bit of bargaining. You know, it might not happen. And if it doesn't happen, what can we work out here? Let's figure out a way. Shock, anger, denial, bargaining, exploration. And I've already said to you that we actually made exploration a part of our transition management plan. We had exploration trips where people could go at seminary expense for 3 days to Southern California and look the situation over as part of their working through the transition and deciding how they might be willing to, whether or not they'd be willing to go. And then, of course, ultimately, adjustment. Now, people process these losses at different rates and in different ways. All of you pastors who've worked with people that are grieving know this is true. You have a memorial service, and one person is sitting there crying and expressing their emotions and all of that. Another person sitting there stoic. And someone who's not insightful about these things will walk up to you and say, well, you know, old brother so-and-so, he's handling this really well, isn't he? You know he's not. You know, in 6 weeks, the one who's stoic today, who looks like he's, quote, handling it well, will be in your office as emotional as the other person was on the day of the funeral. You know this, pastors, right? We know that people do not go through steps of grief. There are no steps of grief. There are stages or phases. People move around through these things, and they move around at different rates and in different ways. So that means when we're leading people through transition, it's not going to be a methodical step-by-step process. It's going to require the best of pastoral care and disciple making, because we're going to be diagnosing in the moment where this person is and what they need, and where this person is and what they need, and where this person is and what they need. And it is a complex process of moving people along. Now, there's enough commonality here that you can do preaching and teaching on the big themes of what people are losing and how people are processing and how transition is managed and how we assimilate or accommodate change. You can preach and teach on big themes, but the hard work requires a lot of discernment of pastoral care and disciple making in the conversations that we have with people during this process. And then people may be handling other losses simultaneously. One of the reasons that people have a real struggle with change at church and the transitions that follow is because for many people, church is the most stable place in their lives. What are some of the kinds of losses people are living through? Let's say you initiate a change and a transition in your congregation that's going to take 3 to 5 years to live through. Think of all the things that people are going to experience during that time. Spouses are going to die, parents are going to be institutionalized, children are going to leave home for college and create empty nests. People are going to lose health through cancer and other kinds of situations. People are going to lose dreams because they're going to not get the promotion they wanted, or they're not going to get the job they wanted. People that you're working with are experiencing all kinds of other losses, and those losses compound upon each other, and then they come to church and you drop another loss on them. And you wonder why they're reacting the way they are, because the loss they're experiencing at church may seem to you to be at this level, but they're reacting at this level. It's because you may not be fully understanding all they're going through. I experienced this personally. For 10 years, when we lived in the San Francisco area, I was the chaplain for the San Francisco Giants. I worked for Baseball Chapel, served the Giants 10 years, and it was a major ministry commitment for me. During that time, the Giants won 3 World Series, and the ministry was so meaningful both ways that the Giants players did something for me that's never been done before for any other chaplain. And that is, the Giants players and the Giants organization gave me a World Series ring all 3 times. So I actually have 3 custom-made Tiffany World Series rings just like the players got. It was a very meaningful ministry. And I poured hours into those guys, winning the lost, discipling the saved, counseling marriages, helping with crises, showing up behind the scenes dozens of times over those 10 years in the lives of those players and their families. You say, I bet that was glamorous. Not really. They have all the same kind of problems all the other people that in your church have. I was just their pastor in that context. On October 2014, after I'd announced that we were moving the seminary in April, the Giants won the World Series the 3rd time in Kansas City. A year before that day of Game 7, Wednesday night in Kansas City, a year before, I had committed to preach the closing message of the Missouri Baptist Convention that day. None of us knew the World Series would be that day and in Kansas City. I'm in Missouri. They go to Game 7. I call the Giants. I'm in Missouri. Is there any possibility? They said, get to the stadium. We'll get you in. My wife jumped on a plane, flew to Kansas City. We got to the ballpark about 3 hours before the game started. I went to the clubhouse and just had about a 7 or 8, 10-minute visit with the ball club. Then went to the family section, sat with the family. The team won the game. We go down to the family section, family holding area. We're in there, all these wives, kids, parents. It's fantastic. We go out on the field, players, the whole thing. Into the clubhouse, celebrate till 1:30 in the morning. I'm out in the hall at 1:30 in the morning, leaning against a concrete wall in a tunnel under the stadium, when here comes a Giants player walking down the hall. He's the face of the franchise. He's been on the media for 3 solid hours. He's missed the entire party. He had to do the media for the whole organization for 3 hours, all over the world, reporters, the whole thing. He sees me, walks over. He's a strong Christian. He walks over to me, and he falls into my arms. And I pat him, and he says to me quietly, I couldn't have gone on another pitch. And this multimillionaire superstar athlete is in my arms. I'm patting him. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the last day I'll ever be here. Because when we sold the campus and moved to Southern California, I had to give up the Giants. That was October. It was a great loss in my life. A few weeks later, December the 6th, Saturday morning, I'm in Dallas getting ready to speak, coincidentally, at a baseball event where I'm preaching to a bunch of baseball people. And I'm having breakfast and my phone rings, and it's a deacon from the town I grew up in who I didn't even know I had his number in my phone. And I thought, and I answered the phone, and Ken said, "Hey, Jeff, I'm glad I still have your number, and I'm so sorry to call you, but we just found your mother dead, and we need you to come." And my mother had died of an aneurysm in the night. My 77-year-old West Texas ranch, horse riding, steer roping mother, never had a sick day in her life, laid down and died. 2014 was what I call the year of great loss in my life. And it reminds me that when I'm dealing with people who are going through loss in our organization at Gateway, that they are also losing family members, losing dreams, losing ministry opportunities, losing health, losing kids who are going off to college. They are all experiencing loss. And what they need from me is pastoral care and discipleship to get them through transition and through loss and to a place of a new, healthier normal where they can go forward together. Well, closing down here, when you're doing all of this, you're going to do these two things. You're going to initiate disciple making, and you already know this, by teaching, preaching, challenging, and encouraging positive steps of action. You know how to make disciples. Good night. That's what we do all the time. You teach, you preach, you counsel, you coach, you encourage, you make disciples. So when people are going through transition, that's what you do. Preach, teach, counsel, consult, encourage. Let's go. But you also can practice pastoral care by doing these things. By talking with people pastorally, like I've been modeling for you here. Talking with people pastorally. Second, by sharing information about what they're going through, like I've done here today. As you read the speech in the appendix to the book, you'll see that I talk in the speech about here's what you're going to be going through, Gateway family. These stages of grief are going to become very real to us in the next few weeks. You can recognize that grieving people process information poorly, meaning that you'll have to tell people the same thing over and over again. That's why if you're moving through major change, you may preach what sounds like the same sermon 4 or 5 times because people are just slow to get it. They're processing information poorly. Come on, pastors, you know what I mean. Here's an example. You're a pastor and one of your deacons dies. You go out to the house, you sit down with the widow, and you say, we need to start planning a service now, and I need to know, did Brother Bob say anything about pallbearers? Yes, Pastor, he did. I think he wrote them in the Bible. So she goes and finds his Bible. Oh, yes, they're right here. He knew he was getting weak, and he knew it was near the end, and he wrote these names of these men from the church. That's who he'd like to have as pallbearers. You take the Bible and you say, you don't need to think another thing about it. I'll take care of it. You finish talking with this woman, praying with her, and then it's a Baptist church, so there's several other people at the house. They brought the food, the whole thing. So you go in the kitchen, you get yourself a ham sandwich, right? You're in there talking to a couple other deacons' wives. A couple other deacons are on the front porch talking. It's just normal Baptist church life. And you're in there eating your ham sandwich, talking to these ladies, and then about 15 minutes later, here comes the widow into the kitchen. And she says, oh, Pastor, I'm so glad I caught you. I'm so glad you're still here. Okay. We need to talk about pallbearers. Okay. Brother Bob wrote them in his Bible, and if I could find that Bible, I'd show it to you. Well, wait a minute now. I've got it right here. You gave it to me. Oh, that's right, I did. Okay, you've got it then. Thank you. Now, Pastor, in that moment, what do you say? What's wrong with you, old woman? Can't you remember anything? You don't say that. Why? Because you know that grieving people process information poorly, right? They don't remember what they've told you. They don't remember what you told them. You have to go over it and over it and over it. Same thing's happening. I must have gone over that speech. In fact, we knew grieving information processed people poorly. So before I made the April 1 speech, the Friday before, we had a videographer sign a confidentiality agreement, and I actually made a video of a shortened version of the speech, and we produced a written version of it. And I said the day I made the speech, there's a video coming to you by email and a printed copy of this coming to you so that you can read it, take it home and show it to your family, and think through it over the next few days. Because I knew they wouldn't remember what I said in the meeting. So I gave it to them in writing and in video so they could go over it and over it and over it until they finally understood what we were doing. That's because I knew grieving people process information poorly. Some of them didn't hear one word after I said we've sold the campus. They just glazed over like, he's done what? Can I just tell you a couple more funny things about that? Come on now, it's getting late in the afternoon. You got to laugh a little bit here. Thank you for laughing. Okay, so after we moved to Southern California, I called an all-employee meeting. And I said, and this is pretty rare for me, but it's all-employee meeting this day, this time. And I got an immediate email from somebody on the staff team that said, have you sold something else? And so from the moment that I said we'd sold it the first time, some of them glazed over, and now it's like a nervous tick. When the president says, I need to meet with everyone, they're like, oh no, he sold something. He must have sold something. It's pretty funny, actually. All right. And then the last thing on here is to create dialogue opportunities. Now, creating dialogue opportunities. What are these? This is for times for people to talk about the transition. Now, this is very important distinction. I'm in the hallway again at Gateway, and Shane, who's our director of student services, been with us for a number of years, he stops me in the hall. He said, hey, Dr. Orge, I've been watching you lead us through this transition. I'm like, okay. He said, I'm watching you because I'm going through it, but I'm also learning because I'm trying to learn how to do it better as a church leader. And I said, great. He goes, so I've got a question for you because you've done something no one else has ever done that I've ever experienced. I said, okay, what? He said, you've told us, not only told us, you've actually organized it, that we can get together and talk about the transition. I said, right. He goes, I've never had anybody do that before. He said, normally when a church that I've been in goes through a major change, they say, if you're talking about the change in a negative way, you're gossiping, murmuring, backbiting, or undermining, and they just tell you don't do it, and they stop it. But you've said that you want us to get together and talk about it. I said, all right, Shane, listen close, and all of you too. Listen close. I've never organized a meeting to talk about the change. That would be backbiting, murmuring, gossiping, and undermining. The Board of Trustees voted, it's over. We will not allow employees to get together in small groups and talk about the fact they don't like what the board did. That's unacceptable. However, while I have not facilitated talking about the change, you are exactly right. I have regularly called you together and put you in small groups and said, talk about how you're struggling through some of these issues in your family. How are your kids responding to the fact that we're all moving? How's your wife doing in her search for a new job? How's your husband responding to the fact that he's going to be having to go with his wife to this new position in Southern California? What's this look like in your family financially? What's the seminary doing that's helping? What are we doing that's not helping? Where are we missing it? What can we do better? And we would get in small groups around tables just like this and have a sandwich and then spend an hour talking. We did that several times over those months of transition because I wanted people to have an opportunity to have dialogue and process what they were living through. Never allow debate about the change. It's over. The new set of circumstances have been introduced. The decision's been made. We're going. But the transition, allow a lot of talk about that because people need to process their losses and find in the fellowship of their in your case, members, in my case, employees and students, they need to find in that fellowship the strength to band together and go on. Last thing, then we're out. Another part of this managing grief well is what I call creating parameters. Create parameters for followers to understand and interpret the change, to minimize anxiety, but establish them carefully because you have to deliver on what you promise. Now watch this. Parameters are like parentheses, okay? So parameters are parentheses you put around the change to give people confidence about the change management and also to remove anxiety about what the change may do to them or their church, or in my case, the seminary. Here's a couple of illustrations. When we were in the first church and we had the land offered to us and we bought it, and we had almost all the money to do that, that was easy. This was back in the late 80s, early 90s. It was going to take about $800,000 to $900,000 to build the buildings to move to the new location. And that was a lot of money for a church that had a budget of about $300,000. So what was the anxiety level in the church about this? It was pretty high because I was a younger pastor. The church had been growing. We had some strength. But this was a blue-collar working man's church, and they were concerned about going into massive debt. So immediately, it was, yes, God has given us the land, but now we're anxious because we don't want to obligate for a building we can't afford. And so, some of us, me, some others, we agreed and brought forward this proposal to the leadership of the church. Let's adopt a church commitment that we will save half the money before we start the project. So when we have $400,000 in hand, we'll start building. What was that? That was a parameter. It said, we're going to put up a parameter that will help us through this transition to lower the anxiety level, that we're not going into onerous debt. We can manage half of this if we need to by borrowing, but not all of it, and we all agree to this. And that's what the church did. And when we agreed to that and voted that as a guideline for the project, the anxiety level went down and the giving actually went up. Because people said, I'm with you now. You're not going to do something ridiculous, not something that's going to obligate us, not something that we're going to have to recover from. We can do this. That was a parameter. Same thing happened at the seminary in a different way. I told you that when we announced about the employees, when we announced on April 1st, we're moving, and I said, I can't tell you who has a job today because we have to have a conversation about that. But I said, all of you will fall into one of 5 categories. You'll either have a job in Southern California, you'll have a job you'll have a job in Southern California, or you'll retire before that time, or you're a student worker who will naturally graduate and leave, so there's no reason for you to be going to Southern California, or you will decide you don't want to move to Southern California and you voluntarily just leave the seminary, or finally, there may be some of you that want to go, but we just don't have a job for you down there, and we'll just have to reach a termination with you. So everybody will be in one of those 5 categories. But today, I don't know which of you employees are in these 5 categories. So we're going to work on that between now and December 31st, and by that time, every one of you will have a written plan of your go-forward, whatever it's going to be, and then after that, we'll have an 18-month window before we actually move when we'll implement that go-forward plan. And you, again, could feel the anxiety going out of the room because everybody said, oh, okay, I have a job today, and I've got a time frame when I know I'll get a decision, and then I've got a time frame when I know we'll implement that decision. Now, to give you just a little context here, there was only one employee that wanted to go to Southern California that we did not offer a position. There was one employee that we offered who wouldn't go because her spouse's employment in the Bay Area was just such that they could not make the change. Everyone else either went with us, retired, or left by attrition. And what I mean by that is, we're like most seminaries. We hire a lot of students and student spouses, and when they graduate, they leave anyway. So we just didn't replace them when they left during that 24-month window. And so we had very few employees that we only had the one, really, that we told, we just don't have a job for you. Most of the rest left by those means I've described. So it turned out to be a pretty good ending for really everyone, and we didn't have any conflict or anything with anyone about any of that, ultimately, when we got to the end. But the reason that we didn't was because we put up good parameters. Now, when I say don't overpromise, be trustworthy and follow through, if I had gotten up that first day and I would have said, every one of you that's working for our seminary, every one of you, I promise you, you have a job going forward, that would have been an irresponsible statement from me. I couldn't promise that day because I have to have conversations with individuals and find out where they are and what they want to do and what their plans are. Now, I had some people that I was making some reasonable assumptions about. I had a vice president who was almost 70, and he was in the discussions all the way through, and he and I had talked about it several times, and he said, Jeff, if you move to Southern California, I'm not going. I'll be 70 years old by that time. I'm just going to retire and let you get a new VP. And so I knew that, but I couldn't even announce that day because we had to sit down and talk about it. Don't overpromise. Don't stand up and say what you're going to do if it's more than you can really deliver, because that doesn't create parameters, that creates disillusionment. But parameters are those safety rails you put up where you say, we're doing this financially, we're doing this strategically, we're waiting on this to happen before we go forward. Those kind of parameters give people a sense that, yes, the change is going to happen. Nobody's discussing or debating that, but the transition can be longer or shorter based on some of these factors, and that lowers my anxiety in putting it into place. All right? Okay. Well, thank you for listening. I have gone really fast, and I know that. I taught you about 50 pages of a 225-page book today, so there's a lot more that we didn't talk about that you can read and meditate on, think through, and put into practice. There's not any one of us in this room that doesn't believe the church needs major change today. We all know we do. But we don't need it every day. We don't need it every week. We need it every season. So every 3 to 5 years, there's going to be those big things that you need to change. Have the courage to do so. And when you get in the middle of that, get ready for the great adventure of your life, because God is going to move. And that's really the best part of it. The seminary moved, new locations, new name, so many new things. But the best things about the whole story are just the stories of how God worked through individuals and families in our school and what that meant for us. And you'll have the same stories to tell when you lead through major change. So thank you for letting me come to Virginia, and I'll give it back to Steve. Okay.
Thank you, brother. Show your appreciation for Dr. Orge. We just want him to come back and come back and come back. I mean, there's more chapters to this book. There are other books that he's written that's applicable to ministry, and we would love for him to come back and be a part of this leadership, really, development and training. So thank you so very much for being here. We appreciate it so much. I was really considering going to Gateway, but since you don't have a gym, I don't know. I can tell. You can tell. It would be a big problem for me, absolutely. Yeah, I'd like to shoot some hoops, absolutely. You guys good? Everything go well? Got some good pointers to take back? Difference between change and transition. Great. All right, let's stand. Can we do that? Jim Drake, we're coming to your church next, I do believe, right? Revitalization. Would you be willing to come here and take this microphone and lead us in a benediction, my friend? Safe travels. Again, thanks for being here. And you'll be receiving an email with the link for the PowerPoint, as well as the link to the recording of this session as well. Brother Jim, thank you.
Let's pray. Oh, Father, we thank you so much for this day that you've given us. Father, we thank you for Dr. Orge and for his leadership, and Father, just the evidence of your hand on his life and on the life of that seminary. Father, I ask that each of us would be able to just glean from the wisdom that he's given us today. And Father, what we want is we want Christ to be exalted. Yes. Father, we want his name to be lifted up. And Father, we know that you desire to use our churches, that you desire to use the believers that gather in our churches. And Father, we want to shepherd them well. So Father, may we take these tools, Father, may your Spirit apply them in our lives and in the mission fields that you've entrusted us to. Now, Father, guard us and guide us and give us safe travels on the way out of here. And help us to exalt Christ. For it's in his name we pray. Amen.
There's nowhere left to hide, undone by perfect love, as shame and grace collide, our sin is overcome in mercy's mystery. We stand